Hey everybody, so Chapter 7, Lesson 4, what we're looking at here again is this essential question that we've been working with, right, for quite some time. Why does a nation go to war? And what we're looking at, of course, is that we go to war because we think it's going to help make our society better, right? We've talked about in the previous lessons, we go to war because we have a number of different ideas or issues that drive us to war, like arms races. We talked about how we prepare to fight a war because we think we have the economy and the soldiers to win it. And that we took a look yesterday that we think we have the technology to win it. And so what we're looking at today is we think that it's going to make our society better by going to war, right? Americans will be better off for going into this war. So we're going to take a look at what happens to Americans, what happens to our society as we are in this war, as we fight this war. Let me blow this slide up here for you so you can see it. Because the reality is that after the Treaty of Versailles, things don't necessarily get better. It's actually worse for Americans after the Treaty of Versailles because no longer do we have all of these people working in these war factories. You know, the first bullet right underneath my head talks about how this demobilization, all that means is people aren't building war materials anymore. And when that happens, when the government isn't telling us what to make, what to buy, that we're going to guarantee we're going to buy this, people get nervous. And you're going to see rapid inflation. That's when prices rise and the value of the dollar goes down. Prices rise, value down. And that happens because the government had been controlling the prices of goods for the war. When the government stops that, people want to make as much money as they can. Prices go up, value goes down. What we end up seeing is the cost of a lot of different things that people needed. Cost of living, food, shelter, essentials, that rises. It's going to make people angry. Wouldn't you be angry if somebody said all of a sudden, thank you for going to fight, thank you for working so hard in these factories, thank you for dealing with all of this craziness of World War I, now everything is going to cost 10 times more than it did before. People are going to get really upset. They're going to need higher wages. So what we see are workers across the country going on general strikes. This is a special kind of strike. It's not just a strike of railroad workers or electricians or steel workers. It's a strike with all unions and workers in an entire area. So it's like waking up one morning and the entire city of York or Harrisburg or New York just didn't go to work that day. Everybody stops everything. And what that does is it shuts society down, puts pressure on businesses, and makes those businesses say, boy, we better do something to help out these workers. Because workers were definitely stressed out. They were definitely tense. One of the ways we can look for that is by taking a look at issues of racial unrest. Remember in our Central Northeastern Combine activity, we talked about how if we had two groups, white America, black America, competing for the same jobs that African Americans held that used to be white jobs due to that Great Migration, you're gonna get conflict. And it's white people who riot. African Americans are in these jobs, and whites come home, and whites riot. And here's what's interesting. For the first time in a long time, African Americans fight back. They refuse to be dismissed from these jobs and sent back to sharecropping. This is a really big deal to see that instead of being sent back like they traditionally have been, Black America is going to stand up and fight back against these white riots. So much so that even politically, groups like the NAACP are going to say, we need to do something about this. We need to stop lynching. We need to make big change, and we need to make it right now. This is a big deal. This tension plays out. In fact, it plays out so much, and it's so bloody, and it's so unexpected that we actually give a name to this summer of 1918, 1919, we call it the Bloody Summer. Because of the riots and the beatings and the killings that happen, it's pretty crazy just how aggressive this summer is in the minds of so many people. So we see racial unrest over this cost of living issues. We see racial unrest and worker unrest with these general strikes because of rapid inflation. And people are nervous. They're upset. Not just because of those economic issues, but because of something else that's happening as well. Something called the Red Scare. Now, I just want you to try and put yourself into the mindset of these people. Prices are rising dramatically. Entire cities are going on general strikes and refusing to work because they want higher wages. And there's crazy race riots going on all throughout the country between whites and blacks over these jobs. Well, we're going to get people, a group of people, that become more and more afraid that communists are actually going to start a revolution in the United States. Why communists? Well, think about it. They had just had a revolution not long ago in Russia, right? Which is now the Soviet Union. So we have all these Russian immigrants here in America. God, all these Russian immigrants that came back when we studied chapter 4 in the Age of Immigration. Oh my God, what if these Russian immigrants are really secret communists? They might take power. Oh God. What this leads to is something called the Red Scare. And the Red Scare is this idea that we need to be aware and watchful and go after these possible communists to keep our country from getting worse and worse and worse. Because look, general strikes, that's one thing, right? Racial unrest, that's another. We've dealt with those in our past. But this, communism, this is something different. Especially when 30 bombs go off across the country. 30 bombs. Many people think it's communists. In fact, when the FBI investigates, they decide to target Russian immigrants because they're saying these must be the people who could be possible Reds. They could be communists from the Soviet Union. The Attorney General, a guy named A. Mitchell Palmer, leads these raids. He calls them the Palmer raids. And what's interesting about these raids is that they break all kinds of laws. I don't want you to think that the Palmer raids are these wonderful things where Americans are investigated, but the law is followed. That's not true at all. The General Intelligence Division, the FBI, they ignore search warrants, the right to a lawyer, they ignore all kinds of things going after these potential Russian communists. They end up deporting 600 Russians. The problem? They never found any communists. They never even found any weapons or bombs. Pretty crazy. America gets freaked out by this. And you combine this reality of the Red Scare, the fear that we could go communist because other countries have, and we have a lot of Russians. You combine that with those race riots, and you can see why we call this, right, the Bloody Summer. I think it really makes some sense that this is something we would call the Bloody Summer. So as Woodrow Wilson's first term is kind of coming to a close, as we're looking at the election of 1920, what we see is an issue between Republicans and Democrats where the question being asked is really quite clearly, what did we get because of progressivism? Now, remember that this is a 20-year-long time span. We're talking about 1900 to 1920, from Teddy Roosevelt all the way up to this point in American history. And a lot of stuff happened. But lately, in the minds of Americans, what have we gotten? Well, we got economic problems. Inflation, not getting paid enough money. We've got labor unrest and general strikes. We've got race riots. We've got these memories of World War I, the Red Scare. Democrats are going to run as a progressive. They're going to send this guy right here, James Cox, up as a progressive. He's a Democrat. And the Republicans are going to run a guy named Warren Harding. And Warren Harding says we need to go back to the way it was before progressivism, because this is what progressivism gets them right here. Forget the good stuff, America. This right down there, that's what progressivism gave us. We need to go back to the way things were before, the good old days. And this idea of returning back to normal or normalcy, what it used to be like, really strikes a chord with voters. So much so that he wins the election of 1920. And when we get back in class, we'll take a look at some of this stuff in more detail, Red Scare, etc., and we'll go from there.